Hello everyone, and welcome to this breakdown of my Mustang video, during which I will take the opportunity to show you the creation of a Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos content. At the origin of this video, there's my meeting with Arnaud Leniel, manager of the company Legendary Cars Online, which import American cars of collection in France. This video is the result of a long-time work which was made possible thanks to the participation of EIZO, Lewitt and Dolby. This video is chaptered. First, a quick reminder of important basic notions that I have already covered in my previous videos. For newcomers, I invite you to watch this part, and for the others, you can skip to the next chapter, which will be dedicated to the shooting and sound. Then Patrice Lazarev will come to explain you the basics of Dolby Atmos, and will talk about his work on the video. Then I will give you an update on the Dolby Vision workflow I used. Then I will make a comparative test on several display systems to explain you concretely what the Dolby tools provide. Then will come the thanks. To capture and reproduce an image, the process is as follows. A camera will record the light, convert it thanks to a transfer curve OETF, optoelectrical transfer function, and a digital file will be created and then sent to a display system that, thanks to an inverse curve EOTF, electrical opto transfer function, will convert the electrical signal into light and thus display the image. There are all kinds of EOTF curves. For SDR image, we speak of gamma curves. For HDR, we have the PQ and HLG curve. The PQ curve is the one that will interest us. It is the perceptual quantizer. It was developed by Dolby. Its purpose is to reproduce in an absolute way the light intensities captured between 0 and 10,000 nits. With the PQ, when we grade an image and assign a certain value of light intensity, let's say 500 nits on this zone, the reproduced image should display 500 nits, provided, of course, that the display system is capable of doing this. This is the difference with the SDR, which does not have absolute light level values. They are relative. We can increase the brightness of an image in SDR. The SDR will adapt to what your device can display. You see, this screen is calibrated to make a grading with a maximum value of 100 nits, which is the standard for SDR reference monitor. But I can quite display a SDR signal at 350 nits if I want. SDR is relative and adaptive. For HDR, it's not possible to change the value of the light intensity on the display. The nits, or candela per square meter, is the unit that will measure the light intensity of an image. The dynamic range is the difference between the highest light value and the darkest value of an image. The color space, or gamut, is a three-dimensional mathematical model representing the set of colors perceptible, usable, or reproducible by a human being or a device. We will speak of BT709 for the SDR and HD TV. It covers 35.6% of human vision. DCI-P3 for digital cinema, which covers 45.5% of the human vision, knowing that the majority of TVs can display an average of only 90% of P3. And the BT2020 for HDR, which covers 75.8% of the colors visible by a human eye, knowing that the majority of TVs are able to display an average between 70 and 80% of BT2020. In video, there are two ways to code the information of the signal. We speak of full range or data level and limited range or video level. The 10-bit full range files use a range code values from 0 to 1023, where 0 corresponds to full black and 1023 to full white. The 10-bit files in video level use values between 64 and 940, 64 corresponding to a complete black and 940 to complete white. All in all, whether you are using full or legal, the white and black should be displayed in the same way. If the content looks washed out or the blacks are crushed and the whites are burnt, then the display signal is different from what should be displayed. An image is composed of red, green and blue. The assembly of these colors will create the others. In SDR, images are coded in 8 bits or 256 possible values per channel, which represent more than 60 million colors when the signal is used in full range mode. In HDR, images are coded in 10 bits, which is 1024 values per channel in full range. That means a little more than 1 billion of colors. The goal is to limit the staircase effect or bending visible when we do not have enough color shades in a gradient. All the contents you watch are compressed. In HDR, most of the files are compressed in HEVC 10 bits 420. We are no longer dealing with RGB, but a rearrangement of the signal with the separation of the luminance and chrominance, called YCR-CB. The human eye being is less sensitive to the color than to the light. We will compress the chrominance without touching the luminance. It is the chroma subsampling. To illustrate this, we will take a block of 4 pixels wide by 2 pixels high. The 444 means that we have all the information in luminance for this block, and all the color information in the top line and in the bottom line. 422 means that we have all the luminance info on the top and the bottom line. The information will be duplicated on the pixels next to it. Finally, 420 means that still all the infos in luminance, but half of the infos on the top line and none on the bottom line. The info on the top line will be copied to the bottom line. By recombining with the luminance, we can still create enough information for our eye to be fooled. Now that you have all this information in mind, we can address a fundamental concept. HDR content can offer a very large dynamic range and very vivid colors that sometimes exceed what your device can display. We will call the combination of color space and dynamic range a color volume. Indeed, the consumer devices cannot compete with the reference monitors. A signal that is too bright will be clipped, you will lose all the material in the highlights, and the white will be burnt. Some colors may also not be displayed properly if they exceed what your display system can render. There is no standardization for this. Each device has its characteristics and limitations. In order to be displayed correctly, the content will have to be modified to adapt to the characteristics of the display system. This operation is called tone mapping. It will be guided by the metadata included in the HDR file. We talk about static metadata when we have only the minimum and maximum value of the light intensity of the whole content. The tone mapping will be based on this information and will be uniform over the entire content. The greater the difference between the values of the HDR content and the values of the display, the greater the tone mapping will be and may impact the image and harm the preservation of the original artistic intent. The static tone mapping is what we have with HDR10 and HLG. In order to have a more accurate tone mapping and to guide the camera in this adaptation operation, there is another alternative, the scene-by-scene tone mapping, which is made possible by the presence of dynamic metadata. Each scene has its own color volume information. Thus, the system applies modification only where necessary. This allows for less distortion of the content and maintains the artistic intent. This is what Dolby Vision and HDR10 Plus offers. To make this video, I shot mainly with a Sony Alpha 7S III connected to an Atomos Ninja 5. The images were recorded in ProRes RAW in S-Log 3 with the S-Gamut 3 scene. The files were recorded in 4204 by 2408 pixels. Some night shots were recorded using a series 50mm anamorphic lens in order to get a cinemascope image with real lens flares and nice bokeh. Most of the stationary shots were done with a Reno Arc 2 slider. For all the rolling shots, the A7S III was mounted on a DJI Ronin SC3, which was mounted on a Tilta Hydra Alien arm. Some shots were taken by Axel Jolivet with the DJI Mavic 3 drone. And finally, David Coffier came to help me with his Phantom Flex 4K camera to realize some of absolutely extraordinary shots at 1000 frames per second. I wanted to create a soundtrack from scratch. I wanted to have vintage atmosphere and to have fun with instruments that I could make evolve in the space thanks to Dolby Atmos. On the advice of my friend supervisor of the sound part, Benoît Le Teneur, I contact the guitarist-composer Didier Lefebvre. Hello, my name is Didier Lefebvre and I'm a slide guitar specialist. Here I use a 12-string slide in C6 extended and it sounds like this naturally. For the music I recorded and composed, I use the EBow, which makes a magnetic field and the note sounds without stopping, a little like with a bow. This slide I use in the first part is a Weissenborn. It's a copy of an instrument from the 20s. It sounds like this, and it's an acoustic instrument. I also use it with distortion. This one I use for the final part, has a lot of power, which this mic, and is very good for distortion. It's in E minor, but it has only 8 strings. Hello, my name is Bertrand Allôme, and on this project, I'm both bassist, sound editor, and sound recorder. On the sound recording part, we worked on a rather original project of ambient sound recording of the car with a device of 5 Lewitt microphones placed around the car in order to recreate an immersive sound recording. And then, as a bass player, I play on the music of Didier. Welcome to the studio Le Manoir. My name is Patrice Lazarev, and I'm going to take care of the sound of the mix in Dolby Atmos. So, in a few words, the Dolby Atmos is a technique that makes the sound immersive, to make the spectator bath in a three-dimensional sound environment. And it is based on two sound techniques, one of which we have known for many years, which is the multi-channel sound. The stereo, left and right, it is multi-channel. The cinema has progressively increased the number of channels, and today we still have a multi-channel system in Dolby Atmos, which is by default 7.1.2. 7 is the number of speakers that are at ear level for the audience, which is 3 behind the screen, 1 of each side of the room, 2 at the back, and dot 1 is the subwoofer. And the dot 2 is the new from Dolby Atmos. It is the fact of adding speakers to the ceiling, the right side and left side again, in order to give the audience the impression that something can happen above his head. So it's a configuration called 7.1.2, which in Dolby Atmos terminology is called a bed. And next to these beds, Dolby had a notion which is that of the sound object. It is a sound, but instead of attributing it to a speaker in particular or to a particular channel, we will associate it with coordinates in the XYZ space, in order to position it in a three-dimensional sound space. The huge advantage of the Dolby Atmos system is that, in fact, it is a device that will read all its information, which knows how many speakers it has to play them back. And from there, it will be able to adapt the signal to all possible configurations. This makes it possible to overcome one of the historical limitations of multi-channel, which was that in order to be able to listen to a multi-channel signal, it was necessary to have exactly the same configuration in which the signal had been prepared. The tools here that I use to mix the film, on the one hand, I need a software that is able to read back to me all the tracks that have been sent to me. I use Reaper because it really offers a lot more possibilities than its little friends in terms of managing the audio signal flow. You can really assign anything to anything and really customize the way you work with this software. That's why I personally like it a lot. And so I have here all the audio tracks. I have my video track, which allows me to control what am I doing on the image. Here, for example, in yellow is the voice of the introduction, and then below I have all my music tracks with the guitars, the basses, the percussions, and the drums. And below I have all the engine sounds. All these small curves of levels of various colors are the various modifications which I can make in the wire of time to make move the objects thanks to this plugin made by Dolby, and which in fact does not send directly the sound, but sends the coordinates here in X, Y and Z, which make it possible to move the objects in space or with this dimension Z, which make it possible to move them in the height to go to the ceiling or give them a different size. It can be a small sound object, or on the contrary, it is rather a voluminous object, which will take more space in this three-dimensional sound environment. That's all the kind of things you can do with this Dolby plugin. I like to mix movies from the Labo de J. It's not the first time it happens to me. And there are two types of challenges in his videos. The first one is that globally, it's a silent movie. There is a little bit of presentation at the beginning, but during most of the movie, there's no dialogue, there's no narration, everything is based on music and sound effects. And then, on this one, in particular, we have a second challenge. There is a whole sequence of the film where we turn around the car. So it's true that in an immersive format, usually, the way it's thought, it's rather that we imagine that the spectator is situated in a three-dimensional sound space and things happen around him. And what we have here, it's the opposite. It's subjective point of view of the camera that moves and goes around the vehicle. So how to render that in Dolby Atmos? The audio file that was provided to me is a bed. There are microphones that were placed all around the car, mainly towards the engine, microphones on the side, and microphones at the rear of the car to capture in particular the exhaust pipes. The way I have this question is to consider that these microphones, which are all around the car, are as many different people that we will embody in turn according to the shots that are in the image. Here is the sequence, and you have seen on the Dolby application that the objects turn slightly, which are always globally facing the spectators, because what we see on the image is facing us, but with a little cheating when it passes close to the head, which still gives an impression of width, both of course with a discrete system, like speakers everywhere as here, but also in binaural with headphones. To summarize, during the mix we will decide which sound will be static, thus sent in the bed, and those which will be dynamic, thus treated as object. Then the module Dolby Atmos renderer will generate a Dolby Atmos master file or an ADM BWF file, which is a big wave file with metadata. These files can contain a maximum of 128 tracks, which means 10 tracks for the 7.1.2 and 118 for the objects. The metadata can also produce 7.1, 5.1 and stereo versions. From the ADM BWF file, the platforms will transcode the file in Dolby Digital Plus GOC for streaming, Dolby 3 HD for Blu-ray, and Dolby AC4 for online music listening like Tidal and Amazon Music. For AC4, you can render a binaural listening with headphones. The signal will then be decoded on your device thanks to the Dolby Atmos processor, which will adapt the restitution according to the size and the number of speakers present in your installation. As you know, my videos are visible on YouTube and some of them are also available for download from my website, to enjoy a better quality on your installations. Since the very beginning of this channel, I try to offer you original contents in several HDR formats, and thanks to the help of Dolby teams, I can now produce you images in Dolby Vision and sound in Dolby Atmos. Even if I'm very happy to make these videos available on YouTube, I honestly have no guarantee that the colors will be respected when you will watch them on different devices. How can you be sure that what you're about to watch will be in the best conditions and that the experience will not be altered? This is where Dolby comes in. In order to ensure the consistency of the image whatever the display system, Dolby will propose tools during the finalization process, allowing the creation of deliverables that will be decoded according to precise criteria, thanks to processor present in each display system, guaranteeing this cohesion. This starts with the gradings, with a software that incorporates the Dolby tool activated by means of a license. We will grade our content on a reference HDR monitor, in this case the ISO 3146, which meets the recommendation set by Dolby. That means displaying 100% of the color space P3, Its contrast ratio is 1:1,000,000, and it can display a maximum intensity at least equal to 1000 nits on the entire screen. Grading is done with the following recommendations. It is done in a P3D65 limited color space. We will also indicate the characteristics of the reference monitor. The deliverable will be in BT2020 container, but limited in P3. In a Dolby workflow, we work in full range. We must therefore ensure that the image on the monitor is also in full range. Regarding the color depth, Dolby recommends mastering in 12 bits, but it's not mandatory. The scenes I shot will allow me to get a very nice dynamic range. The reflections on the body, the speculars, the highlights, the sunny skies and the night scenes will allow me to cover a nice palette of what HDR can offer. As you can see on these oscillos, there are a lot of highlights and colors. I have some very bright scenes and some very dark ones. I also made different settings and color choices on some sequences to see how they will be rendered. I also have some titles animations with bright light effects and also some shots with different formats. There are indeed some night shots shot in anamorphic that must be declared before launching the Dolby analysis. Otherwise, the black bars will mislead the black level analysis. Once the grading is done, we will proceed to a Dolby Vision analysis of the master. From this analysis, the software will create metadata for each scene. These metadata are divided in 9 levels, in order to list all the information that will help guide the destination display system. They will take into account the basics information, such as frame rate, the container used for the color space, the version of the CMU used. Then there are all the data generated by the Dolby analysis, scene by scene or frame by frame, the different trim passes, with backward compatibility for CMU 2.9 versions, the different image format in case there are changes, and the information on the reference monitor. We can also store the values of the maxfall and maxi-LL, which characterize the HDR10. Note that these are calculated separately because they are not created during the Dolby Vision analysis. Following the analysis, an SDR version is created that we will be able to compare directly with the HDR version. It is here that we will make what we call the trim pass. We have a palette of tools that will allow us to adjust certain parameters shot by shot as needed. There is a version 2.9 and a version 4 which offers much more latitude. As you can see here, the trim adjustments do not modify the HDR grading. They only act on the trim version, in this case the SDR version. I can act independently on the color, highlights, midtones and lowlights, and more precise adjustments. We have the possibility to make trim for different display systems, namely 2000, 1000 and 600 nits according to the customer's request. We can see here clearly the difference between SDR and HDR. Most of the green colors are impossible to obtain in SDR, as well as the brightness and details in the sky. Dolby tone mapping will allow me to create the closest possible version of HDR in SDR. Obviously, there is a significant loss of information when we go from HDR to SDR, but we are already more precise than when we graded directly in SDR. Once the grading is finished, we can export. Several possibilities are available to us. We can output an IMF package, which contains the video, the audio tracks, subtitles with the integrated metadata. Or we can output 16-bit TIFF image sequences, or QuickTime ProRes 444XQ, but in this case the Dolby Vision metadata will be exported separately as an XML file called sidecar. From these files, we will create a Dolby Vision mezzanine file, a master from which all the deliverables will come. Just like with the Dolby Atmos, we will be able to create several versions, namely Dolby Vision HDR, HDR10, SDR and HLG. To address all the cases of figures, Dolby offers several profiles of encoding. Profile 5, which correspond to Dolby Vision present on platforms. It is based on the 10-bit HEVC encoding and uses Dolby's own color coding ICTCP. It's also the profile present on the files that I make available for download from my site. Profile 7 is reserved for Blu-ray. We have a base layer HDR10 that can be read by any HDR device not compatible with Dolby Vision, and an overlay called Enhancement Layer that contains the dynamic Dolby metadatas and will be detected by compatible devices. Again, this is a HEVC 10-bit in 420. Profile 8, like Profile 7, allows you to play an HEVC content that is not Dolby compatible, and will therefore be decoded in HDR10 for Profile 8.1 or HLG for Profile 8.4. Profile 8.4 is the profile that is used to play Dolby Vision files on Vimeo and also to record in Dolby Vision content filmed by an iPhone since version 12. Profile 9 is SDR compatible and uses the H.264 codec. To these profiles come to be added the notion of level. The contents are listed in certain levels according to their complexity. This complexity is based on the size of the image, the frame rate, and the bitrate used for the encoding. So what is the use to have so many options? Well, to face all the cases of figures according to the type of source, support, and display that you use. For example, with a source like a Blu-ray player, it communicates with the TV through the HDMI cable thanks to a protocol called ADID, Extended Display Identification Data. Basically, the TV sends its characteristics, model, definition, frame rate, and the type of HDR it can display, to the player, which will take them into account to deliver the most adequate signal. In the case of an application, such as streaming platforms, this is done through the API. The TV declares itself, the platform looks at what it is able to display and the type of connection and the speed, etc., and according to this, transmits the adequate signal. This is how you can see the Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos logos appear if your configuration allows it. Finally, we arrive on the field, because in the end, the whole problem can be summarized as follows. Make sure that the image validated on the reference monitor is as close as possible to what you're going to have on a TV, computer, tablet or phone, and that the artistic intent is preserved. I have here the original content out of DaVinci graded in full RGB 12 bits on the reference monitor ISO prominence. You have here the SDR trim on the monitor CG319, which is much less bright because the screen is calibrated to 100 nits. On other devices will be broadcast content in HEVC 42010 bits, in HDR10, Dolby Vision Profile 5 and SDR. We have an iPhone 11 Pro Max, which is certainly the best performing device in this test, with the ability to display a peak light of 1200 nits and a contrast ratio of 2 million out of 1. We have an iPad Pro 12.9 of 4th generation. It's a model of 2020 and its screen is able to display a maximum intensity of 600 nits. We also have a Sony Bravia OLED Master Series TV A90G that I filmed separately. It's capable of displaying a peak light of about 700 nits and covers 97% of P3 and 71% of BT2020. And finally, we have a Panasonic LCD mid-range 2020 model with a very low contrast ratio of 1280 out of 1 and a peak light measured at 410 nits. It covers 85% of P3 and 62% of BT2020. These devices all have very different characteristics. It's obvious that we will not find the same thing uniformly. There will be inevitably differences in contrast and colors. But as you will see on the same content, these devices have very different behavior. Remember, the image broadcast on the reference monitor is the original without compression and without metadata. The first thing that strikes me is that the iPad and iPhone handle the display admirably regardless of the signal. The iPhone Pro Max is surprisingly accurate and consistent. There is very little difference between the Dolby Vision and HDR10 on this device. The reason is simple, it has almost no need to do tone mapping given the features it offers. The iPad, being less bright, the tone mapping is more important, but it manages very well and can restore the HDR10 almost correctly. For the LCD TV, it's much more complicated. The signal clearly exceeds what it can display. It must do a very important tone mapping to display the signal, and the result in HDR10 is sometimes quite confusing. As soon as the color appears, the trouble begins. We can see on the rock a clear loss of saturation. The detail of the asperities is almost absent. The Dolby version does not have this problem. The saturation is well present. On this clip, we find the same problems of saturation in the bright parts. We lose detail in the clouds, the blue of the sky has almost disappeared. It comes back on the Dolby version. Even the Trim SDR version offers more color in the sky than HDR10 on this TV. If I compare this same file on the OLED, we see that the color is well present in HDR10. On this clip, Those are the dark areas that are impacted. We have a loss of detail in the lowlights in HDR10, quite significant. Look at the orange tint on the hood. It looks less vibrant in HDR10. The Dolby version is much closer to the reference monitor. What follows is certainly what surprised me the most in this test. The simple black opening on this field with very pronounced yellow colors is a real nightmare for HDR10. We have a pumping at the level of luminosity. The field has lost a lot of detail. The TV can't manage the tone mapping with the black opening. Look at the difference with the Dolby Vision version. It is without appeal. We have the detail, no pumping. The frame-by-frame analysis makes all the difference here. Even on the OLED, which is the high-end model, we have the pumping issue. The loss of detail is less important, but the problem is still present. If I look at this file on my computer screen, I don't have this problem at all. It's not a compression problem. I made this test with two different HDR10 encodings. The result is identical. These bright shots all have the same problem on the LCD. The saturation is very impacted. We do not have this problem at all on the iPad, an iPhone, or on the OLED in HDR10. On these night shots, the color in the flare disappears. On this profile shot, we can't see much. The inscription on the body is barely readable. Again, the Dolby version crushes the HDR10 on this TV. Finally, look at the sun in the sky. It is barely discernible in HDR10. We lose a lot of detail in the highlights. Look also the difference on the projections of water drops. Even the SDR from the Dolby trim is more detailed than the HDR10. As you can see, this video that I made, as simple as it may seem, offers quite complex case of highlight intensities, its bright colors, fades to black, and also the difference between dark and bright scenes. So many parameters that put the HDR10 display in great difficulty on devices that do not have great capacity of restitution. And even on a high-end device, we can see display anomalies with static metadata. We can see that whatever the type of device, there is a real consistency with the Dolby version. There are differences, obviously, but they are much less notable than on the HDR10 version. We remain quite close to the basic artistic intent. This is what I wanted to show you through this making of. Whatever the image you are looking at, you have to keep in mind that this is difficult to make an opinion about its quality until you have the original file on a reference monitor next to it. This is the end. I would like to take a few moments to thank all the people without whom this project would not have been possible. First of all, Arnaud Léniel and Jeff, who have shown a kindness and an incredible patience to allow me to film this little giro. Tony Roca for allowing me to film in this super place. Axel Jolivet for managing the drone shots. And of course, David Coffier for his precious advices, and especially for making me incredible image with his Phantom. The sound dream team, Benoît Le Teneur, Bertrand Allôme, Patrice Lazareff, and Didier Lefebvre for making this amazing Atmos track. I would like to thank the Dolby team, Yann Lowe, Michael Eckel, Anaïs Libolt, and the one and only Benoît Le Teneur for the support, the encodings, the advice, and his unfailing support since the beginning of my channel. And finally, the other team for the loan of these monitors, because you can't imagine what privilege it is to be able to make this content with that kind of monitors. So, Fred Roll, thanks from the bottom of my heart for your precious help, and of course, Stanislas Ball and Jean-Pierre Denis. Thanks for watching, see you soon, take care.